Well, good evening. Everybody having a good week?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right, so continuing our study of Lead Like the Lord, this week we're going to talk about Jesus was centered in the sense that he understood his purpose as to why he came to earth, and that's what motivated him, drove him to do the things he did. Having a purpose. What does it mean to have a purpose?
Focus.
Focus.
A mission.
I'm sorry?
A mission.
A mission, okay.
A sense of direction.
Sense of direction. Here's some definitions I found. A reason for which something is done, to have an aim or an intention in mind, the central motivating aims for your life. So what drives you? What motivates you? A crying baby?
You know, it used to be said where I was an educator, money, salaries drive people, but I found out as I studied that a little bit as a principal, that that particular motivator is short-lasted, if it lasts at all. And most people that were looking for motivation in education were looking more towards those things we called fringe benefits, things that were lasting. And I did some research on that one time, and even I think did a little short talk on it. And you know, I saw people saying, I think maybe he's right. The last time we got a pay raise, it was really over the first month of the pay raise because it just didn't seem like we got much. And so what motivates you is not necessarily something materialistically that you get, but there are other subtle things that will drive us, will motivate us. Sometimes we don't even like to admit some of those things.
And it's going to vary from person to person, depending on maybe your needs. One person's going to be motivated by money. Another person is motivated by attention. There's a lot of things that will motivate you. So what is your purpose? We'll come back to that.
Next quilt finished.
Get that next quilt finished. Just before I retired, there was all these companies that would come to work, and they would want to, you know, they first thing they would have you do, they had these dream sheets they wanted you to fill out. Did you ever go to any of those seminars? And so you would go to fill out one of these sheets, and they want to know, well, what's your dream? What are you going to do? Now that you're about to retire, what are you going to do in retirement? And a lot of people that were in the seminar, I mean, they're writing stuff down frantically, and I'm sitting there going, I don't have any plans. I mean, maybe a little bit of traveling and stuff. There you go, yeah. I'm going to sleep in. No, I don't know what sleep is. I get very little. But I really couldn't fill it out. I said, I don't know for sure what I'm going to do, but I'm sure it will be affiliated with the church, most likely, whatever it is I find to do. I really struggled with the dream sheets, and we were talking previously about this, and I think by and large, and he said it wasn't true with the center control. He was an air traffic controller also, in case y'all don't know Rodney. I retired after 35 years of air traffic control, and I worked in the terminal. I worked here in Oklahoma City, and my job, it was kind of like a juggler. And you're sitting there trying to keep all these balls in the air, and somebody comes in to give you a break, and you've got to tell them about the weather and the flow and everything that's going on. And, oh, by the way, this guy has an emergency, you know, that sort of thing. And you're just passing that off to him, and then you go take a break. And so my job wasn't task oriented. It was more fluid, and it was something that, and I would come back from eating my lunch and I'd have to take over what he's messed up. No. So I had a hard time trying to fill out these dream sheets because I didn't have a specific purpose in front of me that I was shooting for. I made it to retirement. I didn't kill anybody. Well, except that one. No. It was fun. Like I say, it's fluid. And at the end of the day, I go home and then I hear on the news that night that there was a plane crash down by Atoka. And I thought, ooh, must have been Fort Worth Center talking to him. Didn't think anything of it. When I come back to work, the assistant manager met me in the parking lot and said, I need you to fill out this accident report. I said, what? He said, you were the next to the last person to talk to that guy that crashed. Oh, you're kidding. And all I did was, I said, contact the center. And the center climbed him higher, and I don't know, he had mechanical failure and crashed him. But that's just the nature of that job. I'm sorry, that took more time than I intended. All right, looking at Jesus and his purpose, his motivation of going through life. You look at his early life. If you read through Luke 2, you got the birth of Christ, the announcement to the shepherds and the angels, and then they presented him at the temple, and Simeon and Anna were there. And then Luke says they returned to Nazareth. He doesn't say anything about the fact that they had to flee to Egypt. And then at 12, as was their custom, it wasn't like this was his first trip back to Jerusalem. But when he was 12 and they go back to Jerusalem for the Passover, and what happens?
Stays behind.
He stayed behind. The family starts going back home in their caravan of relatives and friends and what have you, going back towards Nazareth, and they get a day's journey. Hey, have you seen Jesus? No. And so they had to turn around and go back to Jerusalem and look for him. Sorry. Luke chapter 2. We'll pick up at verse 41. Now Jesus' parents went to Jerusalem every year for the feast of the Passover. When he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. But when the feast was over, as they were returning home, the boy Jesus stayed behind in Jerusalem. His parents did not know it. But because they assumed that he was in their group of travelers, they went a day's journey. Then they began to look for him among the relatives and acquaintances. When they did not find him, they returned to Jerusalem to look for him. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. And all who heard Jesus were astonished at his understanding and his answers. When his parents saw him, they were overwhelmed. His mother said, "Child, why have you treated us like this? Look, your father and I have been looking for you anxiously." But he replied, "Why were you looking for me? Didn't you know I must be about my father's house?" Yet his parents did not understand the remark he made to them. Then he went down with them and came to Nazareth and was obedient to them, but his mother kept all these things in her heart, and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and with people. That verse 49, the ESV and the ASV and the Net Bible say that I must be in my Father's house. The King James and the New King James says about my Father's business. Well, neither the word house nor the word business is in the Greek text. It's called an ellipsis, and it kind of infers back to where he is and what he's doing. And so the translators are having to decide, well, do we put house or do we put business? It literally is like, I'm about the things of my Father. I've got this note from the Net Bible. I must be about my Father's business, in the King James and New King James, in the things of my Father. with an ellipsis. This verse involves an idiom that probably refers to the necessity of Jesus being involved in the instruction about God, given what he is doing. The most widely held view today takes this reference to the temple as to the Father's house. Jesus is saying that his parents should have known where he was. The last thing Mary said to him, "Your father and I have been looking for you anxiously." And Jesus said, "Didn't you know I would be in my Father's house?" I kind of wonder what his tone was when he said, "Well, I'm in my Father's house." So, thoughts? Comments? All right. In the book, Kirk Brothers, I couldn't think of his name there for a second. He made a couple of illustrations, or he gave some examples from archery. So, in archery, you have a target, you have to aim at the target. Oh, it came up automatically. I thought, nope. You keep your eye on the target, and you're shooting with a purpose. You're having to aim at what you're wanting to shoot. And hopefully nobody moves the target on you. But if your arrow falls short, that's actually part of the definition of a sin. A martano means to be without a share in, to miss the mark, to err, be mistaken, to miss or wander from the path of uprightness and honor, to do or go wrong, to wander from the law of God, violate God's law, to sin. And he told this story about a small town, and this traveler he's coming into this small town, and as he's driving in, he's seeing targets. From a distance, you can see that red and white circle, and as he got closer, there was an arrow dead center in all these targets as he's driving along. He sees them on the fence, on trees, on the side of the barn, and as he gets into town, it's even on a bench. And so he asked a guy, he found someone, and he asked him, this elderly resident, about the archer. He wanted to meet this archer. And he said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, all the targets that have an arrow in the center of it." And the old man said, "We don't have an archer, we have an artist. He would shoot the arrow and then paint the target around the arrow." He said, and the writer, he said, "This is why I like this song. I like this story." He said, "I love this story because it illustrates how many of us live our lives. We do not wake up each day aiming at something. We just stay busy all day and count wherever we ended up as the bullseye." Well, this is where I meant to get to today. True or false? Few nods. He went on to say, "Some people have a sense of where they are going. They are not wandering aimlessly through life. They are going somewhere. They're aiming at something. They are spiritual archers. Jesus was such a person. He knew his purpose. He knew when he came to earth, he was headed for the cross. He came to earth with a very clear purpose, a motivation, something that's going to drive him. Purpose-driven. There was, several years ago, there was a book, I don't remember what year it was, The Purpose-Driven Life. Anybody read it? Wayne, few. Then, anytime you wanted to have a bestseller, you wanted a book that's just going to fly off a shelf, well, it's a purpose-driven, and there were several other books. The Purpose-Driven Church, The Purpose-Driven Youth Minister, Leadership, Elders, whatever. And so you put purpose-driven in there, oh, I think I need to read this. Give me some purpose. He talks about in the purpose-driven life about going from survival mode to success to a life of significance, improving how we're living our life to make our mark. Here for a reason. Do you remember the movie Superman? And his earthly father, adopted father, tells Superman, "You're here for a reason." And I think of the book of Esther. And Mordecai tells Esther that you've obtained this status just for this purpose, for this reason, to save the Jews. You cannot finish something that you do not have a goal of something to accomplish in the first place. If you're just walking around aimlessly, I thought of some people going to the store, going shopping, and they're just roaming around looking for bargains. That's not my wife, by the way. She has a list, and she knows the shortest route to go from the car to get the things she needs and get back to the car in the minimal amount of time. Are y'all that way, or are you roamers and shoppers? She goes there with a purpose. Okay, the name Jesus. His very name, Jesus, it's the Greek form of the Hebrew word Yeshua, meaning Yahweh saves. Yahweh. I read an interesting article a couple of weeks ago. Of course, Yahweh, it didn't have the A and the E in it. That was added later. It was just written YHWH. And the article I read a couple of weeks ago was saying that it's like you're breathing. You inhale, Yahweh. And so with your dying breath, you say God's name. I thought, well, that's interesting. So the name means God saves. So every time someone said Jesus' name, they're stating his purpose, why he's here. He is here to save. Acts 4:12. Is it 4:12 or 4:13? No other name under heaven by which man must be saved. Christ came. I saw an article listing. It said there was 31 reasons that Jesus came, and some of them were kind of a stretch. It didn't have the Jesus came to in the text. He came to do the will of his Father, John 6:38. To bring light to the dark world, John 12:46. To bear witness to truth, John 18:37. To seek and save the lost, John 19:10. To save sinners, 1 Timothy 1:15. To fulfill the law and the prophets, Matthew 5:17. He says that early on in his ministry. To fulfill the law and the prophets. And that's going to come up again later. To serve. He didn't come to be served, but to serve. And that's also written in Mark 10:45. To give life as a ransom for many. Luke 4:43. But he said to them, I must preach the good news of the kingdom of God to the other towns as well, for I was sent for this purpose. I was sent to preach. The kingdom of heaven is at hand. It is near. Are you the one? Turn to Luke chapter 4. Verses 16 to 30. Now Jesus came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up. So he's gone back to his hometown, to his home congregation, synagogue, and went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day as was his custom, he stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and the regaining of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Then he rolled up the scroll and gave it back to the attendant and sat down. The eyes of everyone in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to tell them, "Today, this scripture has been fulfilled, even as you heard it being read." All were speaking well of him and were amazed at the gracious words coming out of his mouth. And they said, "Isn't this Joseph's son?" Jesus said to them, "No doubt you will quote to me the proverb, 'Physician, heal yourself,' and say, 'What we have heard that you did in Capernaum, do here in your hometown too.'" And he added, "I tell you the truth, no prophet is acceptable in his hometown. But in truth, I tell you, there were many widows in Israel in Elijah's days when the sky was shut up 3.5 years, and there was a great famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, but only to a woman who was the widow of Zarephath in Sidon. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, yet none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian." And when they heard this, all the people in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, forced him out of town, and brought him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they could throw him down the cliff. But he passed through the crowd and went on his way. This is called Mount Precipice outside of Nazareth. And you can see there's quite a drop. And they're wanting to push him off of that so they can stone him. But it wasn't his time yet, so he was able to pass through them and get away. Now remember the scripture that he read. And let's go to Luke chapter 7. Luke 7, verses 18 to 22. John's disciples informed him about all these things. So John called 2 of his disciples and sent them to Jesus to ask, "Are you the one who is coming, or should we look for another?" And when the men came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you to ask, are you the one who is to come, or should we look for another?" At that very time, Jesus cured many sick and diseases, sicknesses and evil spirits, and granted sight to many who were blind. So he answered them, "Go tell John what you've seen and heard. The blind see, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, the poor have good news proclaimed to them." So he was fulfilling that scripture that he read back in his hometown at the synagogue. And so he has completed that purpose. He's checked that box. Okay, done that, done that, done that. He gave them visual proof. He didn't answer them verbally. "Are you the one?" Watch this. And so he starts healing people, curing people, healing the blind. Go tell John what you've seen and heard. Jesus was doing what the Messiah was supposed to do. Questions? Comments? Okay. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Did you read that book? Wayne did. Stephen Covey wrote this, oh goodness, how many years ago? That came out in the 90s?
I was going to say 20, 25 years ago.
Yeah, quite some time ago. Here's the 7 points. He says to be proactive. You're in charge of your life, of what you do. It's your choice, your decision. So be proactive with your life. Begin with the end in mind. Have a plan. And this is the point that Kirk Brothers was emphasizing in the book, that we need to have a plan, have an end in mind. Where are we going so we can work our way towards that destination? And see, we have several teachers, people that have worked in schools. And when I was working for the FAA and they sent me to a school to learn how to write lesson plans. And how do you write a lesson plan? You have an end in mind, right? This is what I want them to learn. Okay? So when I'm teaching a lesson or giving a briefing or whatever, this is the destination. And here's the steps we're going to take to get there, the things that we have to go through. And so you start with your end questions. They say the first thing you do is write the final exam first, and then you go back and you write the lesson with that destination in mind. Is that true? Mm-hmm. Yeah? Okay. Point 3, put first things first. Work, then play. Think win-win, because everyone wins. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. Listen before you speak. Synergize. Together is better. Play well with others. Working with others, you can get more done. And sharpen the saw. Take care of yourself. Get this balance in your life. Okay, Wayne, here we go. Mission statements. And I have to tell you, I'm not a fan of this trend that's going through all the churches of thinking that we need a mission statement for the church. I think the words of Jesus was sufficient. Go make disciples. There's our mission. So many churches all across the U.S., they've come up with these elaborate mission statements. Y'all know what ours is? Does anybody know it? No? Okay, here we go. The North MacArthur Church of Christ is committed to being a spiritual resource to our community by sharing the gospel, training, equipping, and maturing disciples of Christ who are confident in their salvation and prepared for excellence in ministry. It's quite verbose. I think if we ran this through Reader's Digest and let them squeeze out and just picked out a few key words, we'd end up with this: sharing, training, equipping, maturing. So Kirk Brothers really pushes, over half of this chapter was written about mission statements. And he really pushes, everybody needs a mission statement. Every church needs it, every organization, every nonprofit organization, every individual. We all need a mission statement. As I roll my eyes, sorry. This is one he wrote for his church back in Tennessee. It's even more verbose than ours. I don't think I'm even going to read it. Here's the funny part. Here's what he said in the book. He said that mission statement should be succinct enough for people to remember and grasp it. There we go. What are your thoughts?
The people who write mission statements, are they the ones that need because they don't have a purpose?
They don't have their goal in life, so
So that keeps them focused.
yeah, we've got to make something up. We've got to put something down on paper.
Well, sadly, a lot of people don't have a purpose or a goal.
Right.
And you'll find that in your workplace a lot.
Yeah.
You have to set the goal for them.
And Kirk Brothers in the book, he also said that every position needs a job description, whether it's secular, religious, or even if it's nonprofit. Every administrator, employee, volunteer, everybody needs a job description. I should have gotten a job description before I was able to teach class. That's what he thinks has happened. Let me tell you a quick story. Another congregation that we were at years ago, they were going to hire a youth minister, and this young man came in, and he was demanding a job description. Well, I need a job description. So the elders kind of got together, and they came up with this list of things, and okay, here you go. Here's a job description. Well, you know what happened, right? The first time they asked him to do something that wasn't on his list, no, that's not my job.
It's in the thing at the bottom, it's called other duties. Because every job description has it, and like Patty just said, half of what we do is not on the job description.
Yeah.
I'd say that's the hardest part of the job a lot of times.
Yeah.
I know with us, like, or just in my day-to-day, the easiest part of my job is doing stuff within our requirements that are currently there. If there's something that I have to work outside of those requirements, it takes 4 to 5 times as long to actually get something done.
Yeah.
And I think the same, that's also kind of, transferred a little bit in the Bible. Like there's Micah chapter 6 where they're going through where, God's talking to Micah and talking about all these, over the top sacrifices, even to the point of giving their firstborn son. And he just lays out, 3 requirements, right? And like, these are the things you need to do. It's, I think if we look at it in the light of like being a leader, it is, good for us to be able to find those, to be able to communicate those requirements too, because it really does make, it really does help, our whole group to really be able to focus well and get that sense of purpose.
Yeah. At work, there was this mantra that it's easier to get forgiveness than it is permission. You've got these requirements. Well, I need to get a waiver around this. Well, that's not going to happen. And we had this guy, sorry, I'm getting off track again. We had this guy who just did this incredible job. A pilot, his transmitter had gone out, but whenever he keyed his radio, you'd hear it click. And he's stuck on top of clouds. And so he told the controller, he said, I got this clicking in my ear. He goes, okay. And see, so he went to a different position and said, put them on this frequency so I can talk to them. And so they switched him over that frequency, and there's a device on the plane called a transponder. Said if you're able, he said, dial your numbers into your transponder. Fortunately, it wasn't 7,500 or something like that. That's the code for a hijack.
Oh.
So he dialed in the 3 of the numbers from his airplane, and he goes, okay, I'm going to call you 760. And he just, are you IFR qualified? Key your mic once. Okay. So do you have an ILS? Do you want to land at Norman Westheimer? Because he was down by Norman flying around. And okay. So he vectors him around, puts him on the approach, and his supervisor wrote him up for what he did, because he wasn't able to get the right response from the pilot to acknowledge that he's going to do an instrument approach and everything. He just had this acknowledgement over a microphone click. And so his supervisor just really raked him over the coals and wrote him up for it, and he ends up getting Controller of the Year. He was recognized by the FAA for a great job, but his supervisor was not very pleasant. Getting back. All right, so Jesus is headed to Jerusalem, and this is interesting. Mark chapter 8, verse 31, Mark chapter 9, verse 31, and Mark chapter 10, verse 32. So 8, 9, and 10. Jesus is telling his disciples, I'm going to Jerusalem to die. I'm going to go to Jerusalem and be killed. Then Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and experts in the law, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. He's in Caesarea Philippi. when he tells them this. He's at the foothills of Mount Hermon. So he's about 30 miles north of Galilee. We'll look at that map in just a second. So now they went out from there and they passed through Galilee, but Jesus did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples and telling them, the Son of Man will be betrayed into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand this statement, and they were afraid to ask him. Wow, he's going to die? Chapter 10. They were on the way, going to Jerusalem. Jesus was going ahead of them, and they were amazed. But those who followed were afraid. He took the 12 aside again and began to tell them what was going to happen to him. Look, we're going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be handed over to the chief priests and the experts in the law. They will condemn him to death and will turn him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him and flog him severely and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise again. All right, so let's look at the map. He's at Caesarea Philippi the first time he tells them. And they're traveling all the way down to Jerusalem. They pass through Galilee, and finally, Mark 10, they're going up to Jerusalem. So it's taken them several days, 3, maybe 4 days to travel that far, at least, maybe a week. And so he's letting them know, he's telling them ahead of time what's going to happen. Well, I don't know if it was just disbelief. Surely not. He's going to Jerusalem to be killed. He knows he's going to be killed, and he's going to Jerusalem anyway. Open their eyes. One of my favorite stories from the Old Testament, 2 Kings chapter 6. Elisha, he knows what the king of Samaria is going to do, where he's put his, Syria, where he's put his army. He's hiding, and he's going to ambush the king of Israel. And so Elisha was warning the king of Israel so that he wouldn't go that way, and his army could sneak around and flank him. And so anyway, they said, he's just frustrated. How are they doing this? And someone told him, well, there's a man of God. He lives at Dothan, and he knows what you say in private. And he said, well, let's send the army to Dothan, and we'll capture him. And so they surround the city at night, and his servant, Elisha's servant, gets up early the next morning, and he looks out, and he sees the army surrounding him. And he's afraid. And so Elisha says, he prayed and said, oh, Lord, please open his eyes that he may see. So the Lord opened the eyes of the young man, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Elisha wasn't worried. What did he do? You know? You remember?
He just struck them with blindness.
Yeah. Strike the army with blindness. And this kind of reminds me of Star Wars. You know, these are not the droids you're looking for. He said, the man you're looking for is not here, but I'll take you to the town where he is. And so he leads this blinded army into Samaria, and they're surrounded by Israel's army. And then he prays, open their eyes. Oh no, they're trapped. And so the king of Israel is then saying, shall I kill him? Shall I kill him? And he said, no, don't kill him. Feed him and send him home. Give him bread and water and send him home. So he prepares a feast. He feeds the enemy's army and lets them go. And then what happened? They went home and never came back. They never raided Israel again. All right, the road to Emmaus. In Luke chapter 24, some of the disciples are walking along, and Jesus joins them, and he asks questions, and they're kind of confused, like, well, are you the only visitor in Jerusalem that doesn't know this story? Emmaus is about 7 miles from Jerusalem, a little suburb outside of town. And so they're just amazed. And they get to their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he's asking them questions, and they're eager to talk to him. Well, they get to Emmaus, and Jesus is pretending like he's going to go on. And they said, "Oh, well, come in and eat with us." When he was at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them, and their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished. And then again, later in the chapter, he's with his disciples again. He said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses, the prophets, the Psalms must be fulfilled." And then he opened their minds to understand. Oh. You ever do that? You're reading the Bible and then you have an aha moment. Oh. All right. Jesus' purpose. He was headed to Jerusalem. He had a reason to go there. He knew that the cross was his future. He preached up until his trial, but then what happened? Like a lamb before its shearers is dumb, he was quiet. He did not defend himself in court because a victory in court is meaningless. That's not why he came to Jerusalem. He came to Jerusalem to die on a cross so he could defeat sin. He didn't come to Jerusalem to win a court battle. He had to take on the cross. And before he's arrested, he's praying, "Your will be done." He understood his purpose. He had that force that drove him through his life, that got him to where he was to be. His final words, "It is finished." After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said to fulfill the scripture, "I thirst." A jar of sour wine stood there, so they put a sponge full of sour wine on a hyssop branch and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the sour wine, he said, "It is finished." He bowed his head and gave up his spirit. So, that brings us to this question. What is your purpose? What is our purpose? I mentioned the dream sheets and having a hard time trying to figure that out. Because I was a person who went through life in survival mode. My work had me conditioned to be in survival mode, and I would, go to work, put in my 8 hours, and then I can go home. I don't know if I filled out the dream sheets now, maybe I could come up with something a little different. But I retired, and then COVID hit, and then my daughter bought a house, my son bought a house, we bought a house, my son got married, my parents moved in with us, all within 6 months. 2020 was a crazy year. And I guarantee you on those dream sheets, I never thought, that was 3 years ago, I never thought, I'm going to buy a new house and I'm going to live with my parents. That was not in my mind. But we enjoy it. What is our purpose? Make disciples. In Matthew 28:19, when he said, "Go therefore and make disciples." The go it's in the Greek, it's called a middle voice. It's as you are going, as you are living your life, make disciples. Make disciples is the imperative. That's the command that Jesus gave. and teach them to obey. 28:20. In Mark, it's the same thing. Go, preach the word. Preach the word is the imperative there. Our mission, to seek and save the lost, just like Jesus' mission. Not that we can save them, that's their choice. They have a freedom of choice. All we can do is share the good news with them and pray for them. Guide them, lead them. But going back to that archer, we have to have that target. We have to have a goal, something to aim for. Otherwise, at the end of the day, we just draw a target around the arrow and say, yep, that's where we meant to get to today. Thoughts or comments? Yes.
Revelation 1:5 says Jesus is a faithful witness. I think that's a big part of our purpose and mission both, of being a faithful witness.
Yeah.
When you come back and from where you started when he was 12 to be about his father's business, you could probably insert the word service. If you think about like a military service,
Yeah.
you are responsible for your actions because somebody bigger, better than you is telling you what to do. Jesus was God's son. His service included dying on a cross, and he knew that from the beginning. So, to use Stephen Covey's, one of his habits is he knows the end goal, and he would say numerous times, I'm about my Father's business, I'm sent to preach to the house of Israel, I do what my Father tells me to, what I say is what my Father's words were. That was his mission. And if we are in the business of being about our Father's service, we're going to have the same. We have an end. Heaven's there.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. Next week, we're going to talk about connected. He had a personal relationship with God. So we're going to talk about that next week.